Long ago, in the mountain valleys of the Pacific Northwest, where mist rolled over pine-covered ridges and rivers whispered beneath mossy stones, there lived a man named Eli Turner. Eli was a carpenter by trade, a man of skill and strong hands, yet his heart was a restless sea. He had built homes for half the town of Ashbrook, carved furniture admired by all, and yet at night, when the sawdust settled and the lamps went dim, his mind would not sleep. He thought endlessly about the cracks in his work, about what people thought of him, about time, death, the meaning of all his toil. No matter what he built, the noise inside him drowned out the silence of his craft. One autumn morning, after a sleepless night of pacing, Eli heard that an old hermit, a spiritual teacher known simply as Master Abram, lived deep in the woods beyond the lake, a man who had not spoken for 20 years and yet had said more than any preacher in the land. Something in Eli's weary heart stirred. He packed his tools, left his home, and walked into the forest in search of silence. After 3 days' journey, Eli reached a small clearing. There stood a cabin built entirely by hand, beams fitted without nails, corners smoothed by years of wind and patience. Outside sat a man with silver hair, carving a piece of cedar. He looked up when Eli approached, but said nothing. Eli bowed slightly. "Sir," he began, "I've come because my mind will not stop thinking. I can't sleep. I can't rest. I build, but I find no peace. Please, teach me how to quiet my mind." The old man smiled faintly. He set his carving knife down and gestured toward a pile of rough lumber stacked by the shed. "You want silence," Abraham finally said, his voice like wind through old trees. "Then build me a chair." Eli blinked. "A chair? Build me a chair," said the old man, "and do not speak until it is done." And with that, he turned and went inside.
Eli began the work at sunrise. The forest hummed with insects, the scent of pine hung thick in the air. But inside his mind, chaos stirred. What kind of test is this? How can carpentry silence a storm? What if he hates it? What if I fail? Each thought felt like a hammer striking an anvil in his skull. His hands trembled, his chisel slipped. At noon, he stopped, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked at the half-carved plank and felt disgust. "I can't do this," he muttered. Just then, Abram appeared at the doorway. Without a word, he pointed at a river running behind the cabin, and then to Eli's tools, and went back inside. Eli frowned but followed the gesture. He walked to the riverbank, washed the shavings off his hands, and noticed how the water moved. Never still, never struggling, yet always flowing towards stillness. He sat there until dusk, watching light ripple over water, his breath slowing with the rhythm of the current. That night, he slept deeply for the first time in years. Days became weeks. Eli worked from dawn to dusk, carving the chair piece by piece. The first week, he cursed every mistake. The second week, he began to hum as he worked. By the third week, the forest seemed to breathe with him. He stopped thinking about perfection. He stopped counting hours. There was only the sound of his tools, the whisper of sawdust falling, the creak of the floorboards under his feet. One evening, Abram came out carrying 2 bowls of stew. They sat in silence, eating. Then Abram finally spoke. "When you plane wood," he said,
You do not fight the grain. You move with it. The mind is the same. Do not fight your thoughts, Eli. Watch them pass like shavings under your blade. Eli nodded slowly. He didn't understand it all, but part of him did. The lesson wasn't about the chair. It was about presence.
Eli stayed. He built tables, shelves, window frames, and more chairs. Seasons turned to years. Villagers sometimes came for supplies, bringing tales of the world, but Eli barely noticed. In time, the cabin filled with quiet beauty. Furniture so perfect, it seemed to breathe with the forest itself. The years softened Eli's face, silvered his hair, and emptied his thoughts. He didn't meditate, he didn't chant, he just worked. One plank, one nail, one breath at a time. And in that rhythm, he found stillness deeper than any sermon. One winter, Abram grew weak. He gathered the few who visited and said, "My time is near. When I pass, one among you will continue my work, but not with my words, with your silence." That night, the villagers whispered among themselves. One man, a scholar named Samuel, who had studied every scripture, declared, "I will write a passage that shows I have mastered the Master's teaching." He wrote on the cabin wall, "The mind is like a fogged mirror. Clear the fog, and truth shines through." When Abram awoke and read it, he laughed softly and said, "This is the fog speaking of itself." The villagers were confused. Samuel left in embarrassment. That evening, as the sun fell behind the trees, Eli, who had been sanding a small stool nearby, looked up. He said nothing, but the others saw a light in his eyes, calm as the moon reflected on still water. Someone asked him, "Eli, can you write something better?" He hesitated. "I can't write," he said simply, "but I can say this, and you can write for me if you wish." He spoke slowly. The mirror was never fogged. It was only the wind mistaking itself for glass. Abram smiled, tears in his eyes. Ah, the soundless one has finally spoken. That night, Abram called Eli to his side. He handed him an old chisel, the first tool he had ever carved with. "Leave this place tonight," he said. "Go east. Build where no one knows your name. Speak little, work much. The world does not need more teachers, it needs more silence." Eli bowed, touched the master's feet, and left under the moonlight. No one knew where he went. Some say he built a small workshop by a river. Some say he vanished into the forest. But those who passed through that land years later spoke of a strange feeling near the cedar groves, as if the very air hummed with peace. Years after both Abram and Eli were gone, travelers found one of Eli's chairs left in the old cabin. It was perfectly balanced, light as breath, solid as stone. On the underside of the seat, carved so faintly it could only be read in morning light, were these words: "When the hands forget the self, the soul remembers its home." And below it, a single mark of the chisel, clean, silent, eternal. And so, my friend, when you find your mind racing like a restless horse, remember Eli Turner, the carpenter who built his way into silence. You do not need to escape thought by force. You need only to listen deeply until your work becomes your meditation. When your breath joins your motion, when your hands move without worry,
when the hammer's rhythm becomes your heartbeat. Then, even if your mind speaks, it will whisper like the wind through pine needles. That is not thinking. That is life remembering itself.